She was the woman who made the world believe in magic. A voice that could rise like a storm and fall like a whisper. A presence that felt untouchable, immortal, almost otherworldly. For nearly 50 years, Stevie Nicks carried millions of hearts through their darkest nights, yet she carried her own pain in silence. But now, at 77, there is something different in the way she walks onto a stage. Something fragile in the way she closes her eyes when she sings certain lines. Something heavy in the way she clutches her shawl, as if trying to hold together the pieces of a life that the world never truly saw. People still cheer. They still cry. They still call her a legend. But behind the glow of the spotlight, something is happening. Something the public was never meant to see. Something that has left those closest to her shaken, whispering, holding their breath. Her inner circle refuses to speak on record. And those who have watched her perform recently admit they felt something they could not explain. A quiet sadness. A shadow that wasn't there before. An unspoken truth that hangs in the air long after she leaves the stage. Fans don't know what's happening. Some think she's simply tired. Others believe it's something deeper. But no one, not even the people who love her, are prepared for what lies beneath the surface of this story. Because the tragedy of Stevie Nicks, the tragedy that has remained hidden for so long, is far more heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you will understand why. Long before the world knew her as the mystical voice of Fleetwood Mac. Long before stadium lights drowned her in gold and millions lifted her lyrics like prayer. There was just a little girl in a quiet Arizona home, humming softly to herself. She didn't yet understand why melodies pulled at her the way the moon pulls the tide. She only knew that when she sang, something inside her felt whole. Stephanie Lynn Nicks was born on May 26, 1948, into a family that moved often because of her father's business career. Every year or two, boxes were packed, new schools awaited, and unfamiliar streets stretched before her. To most children, this meant constant goodbyes. To Stevie, it meant learning early that the only true home she could carry with her was her voice. Music became her anchor, the one thing that stayed the same no matter how many rooms she slept in. Her grandfather, a country singer with dreams of his own, recognized the spark before anyone else. He would place her beside him, guiding her voice as she learned old classics. She was only 4 when he started teaching her harmonies. She was shy, painfully so. But the moment she began to sing, something opened, something bright and ancient, as though she had lived 100 lives before this one. By her teenage years, she had discovered poetry. Pages and notebooks thick with scribbled verses, dreamlike imagery, heartbreak she hadn't yet lived, but somehow felt. Poetry didn't just become a hobby, it became the foundation of every song she would ever write. Her lyrics would later be described as visions: storms, gypsies, shadows, feathers, mirrors, silver springs. Even then, she wasn't writing songs. She was building worlds. While other girls her age dreamed of college dances or future weddings, Stevie dreamed of guitars. Of the wind blowing through the open window of a dusty rehearsal room. Of standing under lights, not for the fame, but for the feeling, that indescribable electricity that comes with releasing your soul into sound. It was in high school that she met Lindsey Buckingham, a quiet, intense boy with a guitar permanently attached to him. The connection wasn't romantic at first, it was musical, instinctive. He played, she sang, and in that moment, something clicked. Their voices blended with a chemistry so rare that even strangers who heard them once remembered them forever. Their partnership wasn't destined, it was fated. In the early 1970s, the two of them scraped by in Los Angeles, trying to survive on hope alone. They slept on friends' floors, worked odd jobs, and performed for crowds so small they could hear the bartender counting change. But even in those dim rooms, Stevie stood out. She floated onto the stage in shawls and chiffon, not as a costume, but as part of who she was. Ethereal, artistic, unearthly, people couldn't look away. Yet beneath that dreamy exterior, she was steel. She worked tirelessly, writing songs with a fiery determination that few understood. She wasn't chasing fame, she was trying to outrun the fear of never being heard. It was that fire, and a stroke of timing, that changed everything. When Mick Fleetwood, drummer and co-founder of Fleetwood Mac, heard the Buckingham Nicks album playing in a studio, Stevie's voice transfixed him. It was unlike anything he had heard. Powerful yet delicate, haunting yet warm. The band needed a new guitarist, but they agreed to take Lindsey only with Stevie as part of the package. The world shifted that day, though none of them knew it yet. Stevie Nicks, the quiet girl who once scribbled poetry in the back of a moving truck on yet another cross-country relocation, was about to walk into the greatest storm of her life. Fame was coming. Music history was coming. So was love. And heartbreak. And addiction. And glory.
and loss.
Everything that would one day define her legend. But for now, she was simply standing on the doorstep of destiny, a young woman with a notebook, a dream, and a voice powerful enough to echo through generations. And as she stepped into the world of Fleetwood Mac, the magic, chaos, and tragedy began to awaken. The world sees the shimmering shawls, the swirling dances, the celestial voice that seems to rise from some unseen world. But what the world does not see, what it never sees in the moment, is what fame demands in return. And for Stevie Nicks, that demand came fast, brutal, and quietly enough that she didn't realize the trap was closing until she was already inside it. When Fleetwood Mac released Fleetwood Mac in 1975, everything changed overnight. Their lives became a blur of screaming fans, flashing cameras, endless interviews, and a spotlight so intense it erased the concept of privacy. But that was only the beginning. In 1977, when they released Rumors, the album that would become one of the biggest in music history, the band stepped from fame into immortality, and into chaos. Stevie was suddenly not just a singer, she was the face of a cultural shift. Her mystique captured an entire generation. Her voice, raspy, aching, laced with vulnerability, became the heartbeat of the band. The pressure to maintain that magic was immense. Audiences expected transcendence every night. The music industry demanded perfection. And the band itself was falling apart behind the curtain. Inside Fleetwood Mac, relationships were disintegrating. Stevie and Lindsey Buckingham were breaking apart after years of artistic and emotional entanglement. Christine and John McVie ended their marriage. Mick Fleetwood was going through his own unraveling at home. The band was a powder keg, and every rehearsal, every performance, every recording session carried emotional landmines. They were asked to keep creating beautiful music while living through the ugliest periods of their lives. And when human hearts fracture, they bleed somewhere. For Stevie, the escape came in the form of a white, crystalline powder passed casually around studios, backstage rooms, and after parties, cocaine. It began as a way to stay awake, to stay sharp, to keep working when exhaustion threatened to consume her. But the problem with anything that numbs pain is that it also numbs the warning signs. At first, it felt like fuel. A little courage. A little fire. A way to survive the grind of touring, recording, and heartbreak all at once. But slowly, and then all at once, it became a cage. The routine turned toxic. Bumps of cocaine before shows. After shows. During the long nights of recording when emotions ran too high and sleep never came. The band became legendary for its drama, but behind the scenes they were simply drowning, one by one, in the pressures none of them knew how to handle. Stevie's addiction didn't look like the stereotype. She wasn't collapsing or slurring her words. She was performing, flawlessly, night after night. But the cost was rising inside her body, silently, dangerously. The moment of truth came in a doctor's office. A plastic surgeon examined her and gave a warning so chilling it pierced through the haze. The cartilage in her nose was eroding. There was a hole, a literal hole, in the tissue separating her nasal passages. If she continued the way she was going, she risked an internal hemorrhage that could kill her instantly. The words shocked her. Not because she didn't believe she could die, but because she realized how quietly the danger had grown. How far she had drifted from the young girl who once sang with her grandfather. How fame had twisted itself around her, tightening its grip until she could barely breathe. She reached rock bottom not with a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet moment of clarity. If I don't stop, I will not survive. Rehab wasn't easy. She entered treatment for cocaine addiction in 1986, stepping away from tours, fame, and the relentless expectations that had defined her life. For the first time in years, she was forced to sit still, to confront herself without the noise of the stage, without the chaos of Fleetwood Mac, and without the substance that had become her shield. But addiction is never a single battle. It is a war fought in shadows, thought by thought, minute by minute. And though she survived the cocaine era, a new struggle would soon emerge. One she never expected, and one that nearly cost her far more than she could ever imagine. The greatest tragedies rarely announce themselves. They begin as whispers. And Stevie Nicks was about to face a storm even more devastating than the one she had barely escaped. Recovery rarely begins with triumph. It begins with fear, the kind that pushes a person to confront truths they've spent years trying to outrun. For Stevie, walking through the doors of Rehab in 1986 was not the victory fans imagined. It was the moment she realized just how fragile her life had become. The world saw her as invincible, the swirling enchantress who commanded sold-out arenas with lace, leather, and an otherworldly voice. But in that quiet clinic room, stripped of stage lights and applause, she felt small, human, and painfully aware of how close she had come to losing everything. Her treatment for cocaine addiction was grueling. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, every part of her fought the process. It wasn't just the drug leaving her body, it was the dismantling of the persona she had built through years of chaos. She had to face the silence, the memories, the heartbreak she had buried under the pressures of touring and the wreckage of failed relationships. Rehab ended, but the next battle was already waiting. After completing treatment, Stevie sought therapy and medical help for anxiety and exhaustion. What she could not have known was that the prescription medication she was given, meant to stabilize her, would become a different kind of prison. Klonopin, a powerful tranquilizer, entered her life quietly, handed to her with the promise of healing. Instead, it dragged her into a haze more suffocating than the cocaine ever had. It didn't make her wild. It didn't make her reckless. It made her numb. Numb to inspiration. Numb to creativity. Numb to the spark that had always lived in her music. Years disappeared into a fog. She later described that period as losing a crucial part of herself. Her writing slowed, her passion dimmed, and she felt like she was fading behind her own eyes. She gained weight, struggled with self-image, and faced cruel public criticism that cut deeper than any review of her music ever had. But the worst part wasn't the physical changes. It was the silence inside her, the creative drought. For an artist whose survival depended on expression, this was a unique kind of suffering. Klonopin took away the storm that fueled her songs, but it also stole the calm she needed to heal. By 1993, she knew she had to break free. She checked into a hospital for a 47-day detox program, one of the most agonizing periods of her life. Withdrawal was violent, relentless. Her body shook, her mind raced, and nights stretched on endlessly. But for the first time in years, she felt the dim outline of her real self trying to return. When she finally emerged, she was sober, truly sober, for the first time in almost 2 decades. But sobriety was not the end of the struggle. It was the beginning of rebuilding. The world had changed while she was fighting for her life. The industry was evolving, critics were watching, and new voices were rising. But Stevie Nicks, fragile yet determined, stepped forward again. Her voice, a little older, a little wiser, carried a different kind of power. A survivor's power. And with every note, she reclaimed pieces of herself. But while addiction loosened its grip, a new devastation waited. One that attacked not her confidence, not her career, but her body itself. Something far more haunting was stirring beneath the surface. Something she never saw coming. Even after escaping the clutches of addiction, Stevie Nicks found herself in a different kind of battle. One fought not in the nightclubs and studios of her youth, but within her own body. She was exhausted. A kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, one that sat deep in her bones and spread through every part of her life. She pushed herself through tours, through recording sessions, through the expectations of millions who still demanded the enchanting performer they remembered. Then came the diagnosis, Epstein-Barr virus. It was chronic, persistent, debilitating. The illness drained her energy, triggered severe fatigue, and hit hardest at the moments she needed her strength most, especially when she was preparing for major performances or extended tours. For someone who built her life on the stage, carrying herself with ethereal energy and movement, this was a crushing blow. There were days she could barely lift her head from the pillow. Days she couldn't rehearse. Days when she wondered if her body was trying to force her to stop, to slow down, to finally rest after decades of pushing herself beyond human limits. But the music world does not wait. And Stevie Nicks never wanted to be left behind. So she kept performing, kept touring, kept giving every fragment of strength she had. And her body kept breaking down. As the years passed, another fear crept in, one that struck deeper than fatigue. Vision problems began to appear. Blurriness, distorted shapes, difficulty reading. Doctors delivered the news: wet macular degeneration, a progressive condition that could lead to permanent vision loss if not treated. Her mother had battled vision issues. The fear was immediate, chilling, and overwhelming. For a woman whose life was built on imagery, who wrote songs from visions, symbols, and dreamlike worlds, the thought of losing her sight felt like losing her identity. The stage lights she once adored suddenly appeared threatening. The pages of lyrics she poured her soul into seemed to fade. The world she had always seen intuitively, artistically, vividly, was at risk of slipping away. Every show became a private gamble. Every tour carried uncertainty. She stood in front of thousands, giving them magic, while silently wondering whether she would still be able to see their faces a few years from then. The emotional weight was enormous. The burnout, relentless. Her spirit, though strong, was worn. Her body, though resilient, was scarred. Her will, though powerful, was tested again and again. And yet, she refused to surrender. But the tragedies in Stevie's story aren't defined by a single moment. They're defined by accumulation. Layer after layer of heartbreak, sacrifice, and quiet suffering that the world never saw. The illnesses, the exhaustion, the fear of blindness. They didn't end her career, but they reshaped her life forever. And as she continued forward, carrying decades of pain, loss, and survival, her journey would reveal just how much she had paid for the magic the world adored. By the 1990s, Stevie Nicks had survived storms that would have broken most people. Fame too intense for any young artist to understand, addictions that nearly stole her life, illnesses that quietly eroded her strength. And yet, the greatest torment she faced wasn't always physical. Sometimes, the heaviest battles were the ones no one could see. When she stepped into the world spotlight, the world did what it always does to women in music. It judged her body before it heard her voice. It commented on her weight, her clothes, her looks, her age, long before it honored her lyrics. Her ethereal image, once celebrated, eventually became a cage. People expected the magical, graceful figure wrapped in chiffon, spinning effortlessly. But years of addiction, recovery, and prescription drugs had taken a toll she couldn't hide. She gained weight. Not dramatically, but enough for gossip outlets to sharpen their knives. They wrote cruel headlines. Paparazzi snapped unflattering photos at angles designed to hurt. Critics who once praised her began analyzing her appearance instead of her artistry. For Stevie, who had spent her life trying to be honest, expressive, raw, this particular cruelty cut deeply. She wasn't fragile, but she was human. And when a person already battles fatigue, depression, and sobriety, the weight of constant public scrutiny becomes unbearable. She often looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself, not because her face had aged, but because she felt disconnected from the girl she once was. The girl who sang barefoot in small clubs and believed music alone could protect her. There were moments when she genuinely considered quitting music. Not dramatically. Not in some theatrical farewell. Quietly, simply stepping away from the noise. She imagined a life with no tours, no schedules, no pressure to deliver magic every night. A life where she could wake up without worrying about whether her voice would hold, whether her body would betray her, whether the world would criticize the way she looked walking from her car to the stage door. She longed for something painfully simple, normalcy. But walking away from music wasn't truly an option. Not because she felt obligated, but because music was the one thing that had never abandoned her. It had saved her during heartbreaks, during her addictions, during the darkest moments of illness, and through the numbing fog of prescription medications. Her songs held her secrets, her memories, her losses. They were pieces of her soul she could not let go. And deep down, she feared something else. If she stopped singing, who would she be? The woman the world saw, the legend, was only one version of Stevie Nicks. The real Stevie was a survivor stitched together by memories both beautiful and brutal. A woman who carried the ghosts of her past everywhere she went. And those ghosts followed her into the next chapter of her life, a chapter marked not by tragedy, but by an astonishing resurrection. When the 2000s arrived, something remarkable happened, something even Stevie herself never fully expected. Her career didn't fade. It rose again. Not with the reckless fire of her youth, but with a deeper, steadier glow. A glow born from survival. She returned to the studio. She returned to the stage. She returned to the very places she once feared she'd never stand again. Fans who grew up with rumors were now bringing their children, sometimes even grandchildren, to see her. Her concerts became multi-generational gatherings, filled with people whose lives were marked by her lyrics. And Stevie, now older and carrying decades of emotional and physical scars, stood beneath the lights with a presence more powerful than ever. Her voice was weathered, but richer. Her movements were slower, but meaningful. Her performances carried the weight of a woman who had lived, truly lived, and survived everything thrown at her. But even as her career soared again, the ghosts remained. She carried the memory of her addictions like a shadow that never quite left her side. She carried the emotional wounds of Fleetwood Mac, the loves lost, the friendships strained, the years defined by heartbreak and brilliance intertwined. She carried the fear that her health might fail her at any moment, that her exhaustion would return, her immune system would collapse, her vision might blur again under the stage lights. And yet she walked onto those stages anyway. Every night was a defiance, a declaration that she would not be undone by the chaos of her past. But there was another twist to her story, one that surprised even the people closest to her. In her 70s, long after most artists had retired or stepped back, Stevie found herself becoming something she had never imagined. A symbol. A guide. A survivor whose life resonated with people who had endured their own tragedies. Younger artists admired her. Women in the industry looked to her as proof that a career doesn't have to end at 40, or 50, or 70. Fans saw in her a testament to resilience, a reminder that pain can shape a person, but it doesn't have to silence them. She became, without trying, a living embodiment of endurance. But behind every triumph she displayed to the world was a truth she rarely said out loud. The tragedies she survived never truly disappeared. She carried them, gently, quietly, with a strength the world rarely understood. And though she stood taller than ever, the next chapters of her life would reveal that some heartbreaks never heal. They simply learn to live inside you. Stevie Nicks has often said that every gift comes with a price. But the world rarely considers how steep that price truly was. Her success, dazzling, iconic, historic, was built on sacrifices so heavy that even she, in hindsight, still struggles to articulate their weight. Behind the albums, the awards, the mythic persona, there were pieces of her life quietly slipping away, piece by piece, year after year. The sacrifice of love. In her 20s, she believed she could have both, love and music, partnership and purpose. But fame is a strange, possessive thing, especially for a woman. It demands everything: time, energy, devotion, identity. Stevie watched relationship after relationship crumble, not because she lacked love, but because she never had space to nurture it. Touring for months, recording for weeks, endless interviews, non-stop expectations. She lived inside a storm that didn't allow room for a quiet life. And she knew this. She once admitted that she couldn't give half of herself to anyone. Music needed all of her. And it took it. She sacrificed the family she imagined she might one day build. She sacrificed long-term relationships she cared deeply about. She sacrificed the idea of a stable, ordinary life, the kind most people take for granted. And although she rarely showed regret publicly, there were nights when she sat alone in hotel rooms after concerts, still wearing her stage clothes, wondering what her life would have looked like if she had chosen differently. The world saw the stage magic, the spinning, the lace, the floating silhouette. But what the world didn't see were the painful aftershocks behind the curtain. Chronic fatigue. Episodes of debilitating depression. The lingering effects of addiction and years of heavy medications. Struggles with sleep, stability, immune issues, and long-term complications that followed her for decades. Her body paid a price her audience never imagined. And though she fought fiercely to reclaim her health, the damage left shadows she still carries. She never complained. She rarely spoke of pain. But those closest to her knew, behind the strength was a body held together by resilience and sheer willpower. But the greatest sacrifice was the quietest one. Stevie Nicks never truly had the privacy, the stillness, the anonymity that most people enjoy without a second thought. From her 20s onward, she lived under a microscope, every emotion analyzed, every appearance scrutinized, every choice reduced to a headline. Even as she carved out her legend, she lost something precious: the right to simply exist without being watched. Fame is loud. And for a woman who writes from the quiet corners of her heart, that noise took its toll. Yet, despite the cost, Stevie kept going. She gave the world her voice, her poetry, her stories. She gave us brilliance we still haven't fully appreciated. She gave us herself, even when it hurt. And what she gained in return was immortality. But that immortality came wrapped in scars. Today, at 77 years old, Stevie Nicks stands as one of the last great survivors of a generation that lived wildly, performed fearlessly, and paid dearly. She is still performing, still singing, still writing, but she does so carrying nearly a lifetime of wounds. A legend, yes, but a fragile one. Her body, once forced to endure the punishing cycles of addiction and constant touring, now bears the unmistakable effects of age and strain. Her knees ache. Her breathing sometimes shortens. Her stamina fluctuates. Her voice, although still unmistakably hers, carries a soft tremor that wasn't there before. Audiences often assume she's invincible, that the woman they worship could never break. But backstage, she is careful. She moves slower. She rests more. She listens to her body in ways she never allowed herself to when she was younger. Life has softened her edges, but it has also revealed her vulnerabilities. Years of prescription medications left permanent imprints on her system. Her immune health remains delicate. She experiences bouts of exhaustion that linger longer than before. Some days are good. Some days are quiet battles. And while she tries to shield her fans from these struggles, those around her see the reality. The effort it takes to walk onto a stage, the determination behind each performance, the emotional and physical exhaustion she sometimes carries afterward. Stevie is still powerful. But she is also breakable.